Very excited today, replacing the last piece of stock factory exhaust restriction from my F80 M3. So I got a set of ARM high flow catted downpipes that we're gonna install today. But first we're gonna walk through the installation. This is my first time doing downpipes, so I'm gonna try to walk through it step by step, and at the very least, maybe point out heads up things that other people might wanna know who are also doing this for the first time, who are kind of new to doing their own mods. Second thing is getting some sound clips. So if you've seen past videos, particularly the exhaust installs, try to follow that same format, get some revs, get some idling sounds, some flybys, all that stuff. And then the last thing, and I would normally put this in the beginning of the video, but we're gonna save it to the end, and that's a part selection discussion. So I wanna talk through sort of, the other downpipes that I considered and a little debate on catted versus catless, why I went with the high flow catted downpipes. I kind of wish more people would do this in their videos. I feel like not enough, maybe I'm in the minority here, people who care about not only why you went with the part that you went with, but what other ones did you consider and why didn't you go with them? I don't know, I'm interested in that kind of thing. So if you are too, stick around at the end of the video and I'll spend a little time talking about that. The one thing I'm not gonna do in this video, that was interesting. Neighbors. Anyway, the one thing I'm not gonna do in this video is review / initial impressions, right? So I've done that in every other video, but I'm gonna save it on this one because I feel like I might be doing the review a little bit of a disservice, or doing the part a little bit of a disservice by only having on the car for a couple of minutes to maybe a few hours, and then trying to talk through what I think about it. Instead, I'm gonna live with this for a little bit, maybe like a week or two, try to form like a solid set of impressions and opinions, everything from, not just how it sounds, but like, increase in throttle response, any noticeable power increase, the whole gamut of, the downpipe upgrade, especially because they're paired with the Valvetronic equal length sport exhaust. So that's gonna be a monster of a system. So I wanna hang with it for a week. And if you're interested in that, subscribe and come back in a week or two. I'll post that update. If you are doing this mod yourself, and if you do your own maintenance, and if you have a spark plug change coming up, not a bad idea to time this to do it at the same time, because by removing the components from the engine bay to get to the O2 sensors, that's like 90% of the way there for a spark plug change. So unless you really like wrenching on your car, not a bad idea to time it so that you can do this together. Cool? So, all right, let's go ahead and get to that install. I'm excited. It's gonna be good. It's gonna be loud. It's gonna be fantastic. Dude, I don't know if this comes out, I don't know. I feel like I'm still kind of bad at getting the picture right on the camera, but my God, the color of these things is spectacular. All right, first things first, gotta get the kid's Firebird out of the garage. That thing is so sexy. Look for any reason to drive it. Oh, dude. Even the interior smell of this car is fantastic. Yeah. That wonderful 80s muscle. Guys, let's do an unboxing here, see what these things look like. Now, if you notice that you're not hearing the ambient sounds of the box and the plastic, well, that's because when I filmed this, I forgot to turn the mics on. So let's just pretend, let's suspend disbelief. You're not hearing any of the background sounds, just focusing on how these things look, because that's what's important here. Before I get to the installation, let's talk about tools real quick. Now, from a high-level overview, all you really need is a good socket set, maybe an e-torx set, and a flathead screwdriver. But the one tool in particular that I would point out is this guy here. I actually talked about him on the last video for doing the skid plate. So this is an open wrench on one side and a swivel head ratchet on the other. So I bought this for the Downstar kit to get to the fender bolts. Came really in handy for doing the skid plate, and it's also gonna come in handy here for removing the V-band clamps. So I will link this in the description below along with every other tool that I'm using, as well with all the other parts. Now, this is also the section where I would usually lay out all of the parts that I'm gonna use, all the tools I'm gonna use, but instead of doing that this time, instead of having to sit through all that, how about I just blur the picture and I'll overlay everything that I'm gonna use. Go. Okay, I'll also put that list in the description below. Now, one other thing real quick to talk about before we get to the installation is some of the extras that I ordered from FCP Euro. So I got a full set of gaskets, and I also got a set of replacement V-band clamps. I don't know that I'm really gonna need them, but when it comes to the gaskets, if they're at all damaged, just to make sure that I get a good seal, I wanna have them on hand so that I can replace them if necessary. Also the V-band clamps, mine are the originals, they've never been touched, so I don't know. They could be rusty, I might break one as I'm taking it off. So I also bought a replacement set of those. I figure if I don't use them, I can either return them, or Nardo's probably gonna get downpipes eventually, so maybe I'll hold on to them as another just in case. But again, everything linked in the description below. So now, let's get started. First up, I feel like I just did this. This seems really familiar, like it was a couple of videos ago. Anyway, first up, we're gonna remove the plastic shrouds in the back. So for those, you just take a 10 mil, turn them 90 degrees, and then get your favorite pry tool or something. Link in the description below if you'd like a set. But get your favorite pry tool and then pull up the little plastic clip. There's one on each side. Next up, we remove the carbon fiber brace. So you have 8 13 mil bolts all the way around, and then 1 10 mil on the coolant tank. My setup's a little bit different with the Downstar kit. Mine is 6 mils all the way around, and then a 5 mil on the coolant tank, but it is 13 mils and the 10 mil if you have a stock setup. Next up, remove the engine cover. So this is held in place, it just snaps into place at the 4 corners. So gently lift up at each corner and then you can pull that right off. All right, after that, next up, I'm gonna remove the mass airflow sensor from the intake. So this is a T15. That one screw is kind of hard to get to on the bottom, so you can choose an Allen key. I think it's maybe a 764, something like that, I don't know. But in any case, T15 or an equivalent Allen key, you can remove that mass airflow sensor with those 2 bolts. All right, so once you get the mass airflow sensor out of the way, just take a flathead screwdriver or a 6 mil socket, loosen up the intake clamp, and then you can sort of use the accordion-ness of that pipe, kind of push it back out of the way a little bit, and then lift up your intake. I have the AWE S-Flow intakes, but the stock is the same in the sense that they will just lift right out. Once you get the intake out of the way, it is a 10 mil bolt that holds that intake tube into place. I have the Downstar kit, so for me it's a 5 millimeter, but then you can just undo that 10 mil bolt, lift the intake tube out, and it's always a good idea to take a microfiber towel or a wad of paper towels and put them in that port there so that you don't run the risk of dropping anything down there. All right, next up is the charge pipe. So again, take a flathead screwdriver or a 6 mil socket, loosen up all the clamps at the intercooler, and then each charge pipe is held in place by one E10. So you'll loosen up those bolts one at a time, and then wiggle out the charge pipes from the coupler at the intercooler. And again, once you remove the charge pipe one at a time, always a good idea to put a microfiber towel or a wad of paper towels in there. So, and this is the case of the turbo, you definitely don't want to drop anything down there. Now, while you're here, go ahead and finish removing the couplers from the intercooler. I didn't do that right away, but they will need to be removed. Now, you're also going to need to remove the secondary engine cover. So for this, you just have to unsnap the mass airflow sensor tubing in 2 different places here. So they're held in by 2 metal clips. Just kind of rotate them out and then pull straight up, and they'll snap off, and then you can get the mass airflow sensor entire cabling out of the way. Same with the engine cover. The secondary engine cover just snaps in place at the 4 corners. So just pull up gently at each corner, and then you can route it underneath this other tubing that's towards the back of it. You don't have to remove that. Now, this is why I say if you have to do spark plugs, not a bad idea to do this now, because the only additional step you would need to do for spark plugs is to remove the aluminum brace. Don't have to do that now, but just saying. All right, guys, so I just got the first O2 sensor removed, and it was a little bit of a hassle, so let me walk through this real quick. So in order to remove the O2 sensor, to unsnap it, there is this gray sort of clip in the back. You push it straight out, and then you push down on it, and that is supposed to release the sensor clip, right? The only problem is that even if you're pushing down on this, which is kind of difficult anyway because it's a very cramped space, but even if you're pushing down on this, sometimes this seems that it didn't really release as it should. So I found that in addition to maybe pushing down on the gray clip, you can also pull up on the front of it. So you can also sort of pull up right here, and then that will help release the entire plug. So these only go in one way, so It's a good idea to maybe mark these. I haven't yet, but you can. But it's also helpful. There's a clip further in the back that I can't really show you, but you can feel it. And you can just give it a little tug off to the side, and that'll release it from that last clip in the back. And then from there, you can kind of pull this up a little bit higher and get a sort of better view of it, right? So anyway, just a heads up about that O2 sensor, getting ready to do the second one. It's the exact same procedure, probably a little more tough because it is a little further back. So you're just gonna kind of feel your way through this, but that's how you do it. Okay, so now under the car, first thing we're gonna do is remove the transmission pan. This is held in place by 8 16mm bolts. So we'll go ahead and remove all of those. And then you have 8mm bolts all the way around that. I think there's maybe 10 or 12 total. Probably best to remove all but the center 2 16mm bolts, remove all of the 8mm bolts, and then so for the last thing, you'll just remove those 2 center 16mm, and then you'll pull backwards for the pan to be released. It's kind of slightly tucked underneath of the skid plate. So just pull back and then it'll drop. All right, so the last thing to remove is the felt pan that runs alongside the mid pipes. This is held in place by a bunch of 8mm bolts and then one 8 or a 10mm nut in the back that you might be able to loosen by hand depending on how tight it is. Word of warning, the 8mm bolts that run tucked up alongside the mid pipes are kind of hard to get to, so an extension, like a socket extension, might be helpful here. Okay, now with the covers out of the way, we can get to the O2 sensors. These are the same process as the ones in the engine bay, so just unhook them from their clips, and you'll have to follow the wires back. They're hooked in a couple of different places, but to remove them, again, same process, just slide that gray clip back, and then you can pull them apart. We'll file this one under bad camera angles, but what I'm doing here is removing the 4 11mm nuts and the 2 T30s that connect the downpipes to the mid pipes. Now, be sure that you grab a T30. Don't grab a T25. In fact, if you have a T25, put it in another room so that way you don't accidentally grab it and strip the T30 bolts. Ask me how I know. So you're gonna remove those T30s, those 2 T30s, and then after that, your downpipe to mid-pipe connection is free. Now, depending on what you want to do with your exhaust, you could drop the entire exhaust if you want to, but what I did was I just removed the 2 E10s that hold that gray hanger into place, otherwise known as the trans mount, and then went a little further back, and at the red hangers, I removed the bolts there too. Now, typically on a stock exhaust and some aftermarket exhausts, you'll have the 2 red hangers, one on each side, and each is held in place with a 13mm bolt, and one on the passenger side is held in place by an 8mm bolt. Because I had the Valvetronic setup, it's just the right-hand side, or depending on what you're looking at the car, the passenger side. So I removed the bolts for that hanger, and then removing those 2 allowed me to drop the mid pipes enough to give me access, give me some room to remove the downpipes. Also, good idea here to use your primary jack or a secondary jack, depending on how you have your car set up. But use a jack to sort of prop the mid pipes up, and that way you can kind of, as you slowly release tension on it with the jack, you can lower them, and that'll sort of help hold it into place while also, again, giving you the clearance to remove your downpipes. All right, now once your mid pipes are out of the way, at this point I am removing the floating flange, which is on the driver's side downpipe, and then also all of that is connected to the flat flange plate that connects both downpipes. So take all that off. The one on the passenger side is fixed to the downpipe, so you're just going to be removing the floating flange with the flat flange. And here also you're going to be removing the donut gaskets that go around the downpipes. All right, and once those flanges were off, at this point I went ahead and took a 10mm socket and started removing the bolts or the nuts to the downpipe bracket. So this is what holds the left side downpipe bracket into place because it is the longer pipe. All right, so quick heads up about the hanger here that holds the downpipe into place. So right here you have 2 10mm nuts that have to be loosened. Problem is that if you just take a socket to this, it'll probably free spin. So I used the swivel head ratchet to hold the back end, the bolt head side in place while spinning the socket to loosen the nut. All right, so let me see if I can get this right. Where you at, fool? All right, so here is the view from if my head is pointed towards the front of the car. Here is the passenger side engine mount. Here is the downpipe on the passenger side. And so right there, and that right there is the V-band clamp for the passenger side downpipe. So loosen that 13mm bolt with the swivel head ratchet, and then you can remove the clamp. All right, so V-band clamp is loose. By the way, so once I got the bolt off,
This side was flexible, but the other side was not. This was kind of stuck. So I used a long flathead screwdriver just to kind of get under this spot right here. You probably can't really see it with the lighting, but just to kind of loosen up, to break the seal on the right-hand side of the clamp. So it's gonna feel like that even after you loosen the V-band clamp, it's gonna feel like the downpipe is not moving at all, like it's completely stuck. It's just that seal to the turbo, and especially in my case, the right-hand side here had to be broken loose. But once that happened, clearly the downpipe is loose. So now I am gonna wiggle it free, get this clamp all the way removed, wiggle this free, and try to maneuver it out from here. So this is gonna be fun. Once you got the V-band clamp free for the passenger side downpipe, last step is to, unless you already did this, but to free this O2 sensor from this sort of bracket right here. So if you spin this around, you can kind of see right here. So this clip right here hooks on right there. Right there. Passenger side downpipe is free. Now I got the driver's side. We have one more O2 sensor clamp in place, and that is right here. So we got to loosen this before we drop the downpipe. So there's a little tab right here. You can push it up, and then this will pop down. All right, so here is our driver side downpipe. Passenger side is released. Here is the passenger side engine mount. So if you follow that straight to right here, there is the V-band clamp for the driver's side downpipe. So we get 13 mil ratchet on that, loosen that up, and then we can wiggle this free. All right, you know what else is a good idea? Pro tip, make sure that you have all of the tools that you need before you get into a project. So I knew I didn't have an O2 sensor socket, but I figured no big deal because I have a 22, all you need is a 22 millimeter open wrench. And I figured, surely I have one of those. Turns out, I don't have one of those. It's like, really? I don't have a 7/8 22 millimeter wrench. So fortunately, AutoZone has the socket, so I'm gonna go pick it up, and then I'm gonna come home and reevaluate my tool setup, because that's probably, I feel like you should probably have one of those. It's a little frosty. Little frosty. 27. Come on, man. You know, I could have used like an adjustable wrench. I'm sure that would have been fine, but I figure why not try to get torque values somewhat right. I probably could have just used an adjustable wrench. All right, guys, quick demonstration of an O2 sensor swap. So this is our old shorty. Here's our new one. So just gonna do a direct one-to-one switch over here. Now, before we start, would recommend getting the new one ready to go, because once you take the O2 sensor out, the end of it is pretty sensitive and you don't really want to get it dirty, damage it, get anything in it. Best just to take one out at a time and then put them directly in the new one. Now here is our O2 sensor socket. So this is going to slide right on over the wire, get into place, and then we'll loosen this up. Heads up, these are on here pretty tightly, so it takes a little bit of pull in order to break this free. There we go. Set it in there, and then just put this right into the new one. All right, now tighten this down to 37 foot-pounds. Now I pre-test fitted this socket on all of the O2 sensors ahead of time. The only one that it was kind of difficult with is the bottom one of the short downpipe. So because of this bracket attachment here, you can't slide it over. And because of the thickness of the heat shielding here, can't
get that attached there either. So because this wire is pretty thin, I just pinched this section here in order to slide this on. So just enough to get it into place and get it on. And then I figure when I'm done, I'll just kind of re-pinch this a little bit to sort of get it back in shape. Should be good to go.
All right, so before we start getting the new downpipes on, I thought I'd point this out real quick, and that is the changing of the gaskets at the turbo. If you have like a proper pick tool or something, that's great. I'm just using a very small flathead screwdriver. Kind of reach up in here and pick right at the edge. So you can kind of reach up in here and pick right at the edge, and then pull this right on out. And then do a direct replacement with the new one before getting everything attached to make sure you get a good seal. So here is one, and then your other turbo is a little further back, right up there. So that one's gonna be a little bit easier to get to, but all in all, neither one of them are really that bad. Give us a good seal for when putting the V-band clamps back on. Also going to use the new ones of those, even though my stock ones still looked okay, but again, I got them, why not use them?
So getting that first downpipe in, the longer one, right? So I don't have my car jacked up all that high. And I figured though there'd still be plenty of clearance on the ground to get the first downpipe in. Well, the angle that you have to sort of guide it in, the more clearance that you have, the better. It did eventually go in, but it was exceedingly difficult. So the angle to get it started, because I tried like 50 different angles, figuring there's no way this thing's going in, right? So the way that I ended up getting it in was the O2 sensor at the front was angled kind of at a, I don't know, 30 degrees towards sort of the transmission. And then what ended up happening is that the bottom of the downpipe, the part that meets the midpipe, was hitting the ground, and I didn't really have the leverage or the room really to kind of maneuver it into place. There is a heat shield that's on the left-hand side that seems pretty rigid, but you can sort of flex that a little bit, and that's ultimately pushing that in towards the left is what ultimately made it so that I could get the downpipe in. I was actually pretty sure that it wasn't gonna happen. I was like, I'm either gonna have to jack up the car more or go get some quick jacks or something, which I should still do that. But anyway, the second thing is that if you are doing this by yourself, attaching the V-band clamp to the turbo to the first downpipe. Haven't done the second one yet, but that one's shorter, so I'm anticipating it be a little bit easier. But getting the V-band attached to the turbo for the longer downpipe, also ridiculously difficult, because I don't know about other brands, but the ARM downpipes, they don't seem to have that same bracket that the stock ones have. So what I would have expected is that you hoist it most of the way into place. You can reattach the bracket that sort of holds it right before the midpipe, and then you can sort of fidget it, and at least with that held mostly the weight in place, you can then get the V-band clamp on. Everything that you think you're gonna need, have everything within reach, because if not, you'll lose the tension from the V-band to maybe slipping with the other hand, and then it swivels off balance, and then you have to realign and everything like that. So anyway, onward. Now, when it comes to retightening the V-band clamps, the torque specs that I found online were 10 foot-pounds for each of those bolts. However, I really had no way to get any kind of a torque socket or a torque wrench up in there, so I just tightened them to as much as I could given the space that I had. So for the one downpipe, again, I was able to use the socket wrench to be able to tighten it, which was really easy. And then for the other one, I was only able to get the ratchet, flex head ratchet back in there, which still not too bad. Trying to tighten that up, obviously that is a little bit more difficult, but yeah, I just made them as tight as I could get them.
Worth noting, before putting on the downpipe flange, I did take a minute to put a little brush on the end of the drill and sort of clean up around where the previous gasket was. It really wasn't that bad, but just to make sure it's nice and smooth, ready for the next gasket.
For the bolts connecting the mid-pipes to the downpipes, depending on which version you have, again, for the ARMs, you get 13 mil nuts as opposed to the stock 11 mils. I read that those are about 14 foot-pounds. Again, I just tightened them really tight just to make sure that that seal was really good.
All right, so starting to piece things back together here. I'm kind of curious how this is going to go because the driver's side downpipe, this one was a little longer than this one. I've twisted this every which way, and still this one is just a little bit longer. So far it seems to seem like we're gonna be all right. I only have this very barely tightened, not even tightened, just in place enough to get it to hold. So got to get this actually has 13 mil nuts as opposed to the stock 11s, and they don't use the T30s. So a little bit different hardware, but gonna start getting this tightened up and see if it actually aligns. These were kind of off a little bit. So again, curious to see how this is gonna work out, but the V-band clamps are still loose. So if I need to make some minor adjustments, I should still be able to. So time to get this tightened up and see if everything holds. All right, there is a light to the end of this tunnel. So let me talk through this section real quick because it was a little tricky. So when it came to the exhaust, so I ended up dropping the exhaust a little bit, as I mentioned before, with the trans mount and the red hanger, red mount in the back. And so that gave me the clearance to be able to get the downpipes out. So now that the downpipes are back in, basically the order that I went was to kind of loosely guide them in, get the V-band clamp back on, but not tighten it all the way, and then get the hardware all lined up. And so if you're doing ARM downpipes, by the way, hardware is a little bit different. They, again, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but they don't have the T30s, and instead of 11 mil nuts, these are 13s. So a little bit different, but in any case, so you kind of like loosely fit everything. Make sure to get the donut gaskets back in place before you lift the mid pipes on, which I forgot to do the first time. So I had to do that over again. And then again, if you really if you have a secondary jack or even your primary one, if your car is completely up on jack stands, it really does help to use the jack at some place to kind of hold the exhaust while you're either trying to get the mounts reattached or to lift it up in place to connect the mid pipes, whatever it is. And then 3 out of 4 of these are tightened. I still have to get to the really difficult one right here, but after that, these are good to go. V-band clamps, then I've already retightened those, like completely tightened them, and then replugged back in the O2 sensors. So these are in place. These really did not run quite the same way they did before, so I just did sort of the best I could to find mounts where I could to kind of get them into place. Actually, this one belongs in here with that one. So this one here, and then the heat shielding should protect everything around here. So yeah, if you're doing this yourself, you'll probably, I don't think any specific instruction is really going to be helpful because you just kind of figure out how to route everything and what order to get everything done in, kind of as you're feeling everything along. So that's where we are. And so the hangers are retightened. Still have to get the center brace back on, get this last 13 mil tightened, and then get the splash shields on. And then we are done down here. Put everything back together in the engine bay, and hope this works because my optimism is quite mixed. I wouldn't even know where to begin to explain the stupidness of what just happened and why this job is not done yet. Something about a socket wrench that got stuck on the top 13 mil bolt head behind the downpipe. All right, we're done here. Officially done. Reattach the felt panel that goes up alongside of the mid pipes, and those just get the 8 mils all the way around. And then finally, you'll put the splash shield back in place, the transmission shield. That gets slid in underneath of the skid plate, get that back in place. What I did was just loosely tightened the 16s all the way around, the 16 mil bolts all the way around, got the 8 mils completely tightened, and then went back in and then tightened and torqued down the 16 mils, and those are 41 foot-pounds, which I gave a little extra turn to. Not a whole one, just a little bit. All right, so here's a shot of the O2 sensors coming up from the bottom of the car. So I got them snapped back into place. They're still loose, they still have to be running everything, but obviously reconnecting them, same opposite order of connecting. Just push them into place and snap that gray clip
towards the front. I think it automatically does that when you snap them in, but just verify, push in the gray clip, make sure it's in place. We'll reuse the same clips along the way to mount them. Now for putting everything back in the engine bay, again, start with the secondary engine cover. So you can just slide that underneath that wiring and then snap that back into place at the four corners. Next, put the couplers back on the intercooler and then just kind of have those clamps set up. Don't tighten them quite yet because you got to get the charge pipes back on. When you do, just kind of angle them back in place, tighten up the E10 that goes into each one by one. There's not a torque spec that I'm aware of here, so I just made this reasonably tight and then went ahead and tightened the clamps back up again. No real torque specs there, just make it snug so it's not going to move. All right, once the charge pipes are back in place, you can go ahead and put the intake tube back in. The stock bolt here is the 10 mil and no torque spec that I'm aware of, so just tighten that so it's pretty snug. Next, you can seat your intake back into place. And again, the clamp that connects the tube to the actual intake, you can just tighten that up so it's a good fit. Mass airflow sensor, so you can reroute this back over the secondary engine cover, just snap those clamps back into place in the two spots, and then get it back into the intake tubing. Then get your T15 or whatever, your 764 Allen key, and then get those bolts, those two screws back into place for the mass airflow sensor. So once your intake is back in place, go ahead and put the engine cover back on. That just snaps in your four corners there. Then you can get the carbon fiber brace back on. These bolts are 28 foot-pounds all the way around for all of the 13 mils, and then just snugly tighten up the 10 mil bolt that connects to the coolant tank. And last step is to put the plastic shrouds back on in the back, so just get those back in place. Each of those 10 mils get turned 90 degrees to lock them back in. There's little arrows that should meet up to show you where the locking position is, and then put the plastic clips back in place on each side. You are good to go. Okay, we've run into a small snag here, so let's talk through this. So I got done the installation. Everything, it kind of sucked, but it all kind of buttoned up nicely. Got everything done. Got it off the jacks, got it off the ramps, started up, sounded good, sounded really good. No check engine lights, no weird sounds or anything like that. Went to go take it out for a test drive, and that's when I heard this. This seemed to happen between 1,500 and 2,000 RPMs, neighborhood drive, about 20 miles an hour or so. But you couldn't hear it on the open road. So once you kind of got going on the road, totally fine, but nonetheless, it's an obvious problem, right? So contacted ARM directly, even though I got these from Extreme Powerhouse, I contacted ARM to ask what was the sort of recommended tolerance of the long side pipe, which I'm sure that was the issue, either touching the subframe or the transmission bolt, maybe both. So we exchanged a couple of emails, and to ARM's credit, they responded almost immediately, and we kind of got this all worked out in a couple of hours. But we exchanged a couple of emails. I sent them a video of what it sounded like and a picture of how the downpipes look installed. And they offered to just immediately send out a replacement long side downpipe. So I asked them, you know, based on what you saw or heard, like what about this seemed like maybe a warranty issue? They said that there was a batch of these downpipes that had made it out to distributors that had a problem. And so not all of them got pulled. It seems like I may have gotten one of them, so they immediately just issued a warranted replacement part, and it's already on the way. However, I believe I can still go ahead and get some sound clips because the rattling sound, again, only happens at a very low speed. And to hear the car, you know, with revs or with fast drive-bys, you won't hear the sound. So you still get a good approximation of what this sounds like paired up with the Valvetronic exhaust. If there's anything noteworthy to put in once I get the replacement part, I'll be sure to add that into the follow-up video. So let's go get some sound clips.
All right, the last two times I tried this, the audio was completely blown out, which I don't remember having that problem before. So I don't know, maybe that says something about this setup. But yeah, so 3, 5, and 7,000 RPM revs with valves closed, and then in Sport Plus with the valves open, as far as I can go, I guess. And I got the recorder in the trunk for good measure. So see if that does anything. All right, let's do this.
Mm-hmm.
doing drive-bys because I tried 4 different locations, 2 different times. Did not work out well. Let's try to get some audio on the drive home.
So let's wrap up this video with a quick discussion about the different downpipes that I considered and a quick debate on catted versus catless. So there was really 4 different manufacturers that I looked at, including the ones that I ended up going with, ARM. Now, in this case, really, I generally don't consider price to be a factor when picking a part, you know? Like sometimes when you're trying to figure out something for your car, sometimes it's the cheapest part, sometimes it's the most expensive. Usually I feel it falls somewhere in between, right? So even though I generally don't consider price at the top of the sort of list, it was, I think, a pretty contributing factor for downpipes, only because 2 reasons. One, you really don't, like you don't see them. Like once, you know, you get a quick look at them and you know, you can marvel over the welds and the name of the company stamped on the pipe, but then it gets shoved up in the engine bay, never to be seen again. So who cares how they look? The other thing is sound, right? So the space that you have to work with in there for downpipes, it doesn't really lend to a whole lot of variation in pipe design. So I don't think that you get a bunch of tonal differences like you would with like a full exhaust system. By the way, if you disagree on any level, by all means comment below, happy to hear opposing views. So anyway, what's left is build quality and, you know, fitment, which is funny that we're going to talk about fitment given the scenario that we found ourselves in here, but that's okay. So build quality and fitment. And so of those, there were 4 companies that I considered. So first of all, Active Auto Work, top shelf company, great parts. I used to have their mid pipes. You know, they fit great, great build. Met those guys at Invasion last year, super cool. However, at about $3,000 for a set of downpipes, they were certainly sort of at the top tier of F80 downpipes. And the reason I was initially looking at them was because before I thought about tuning the car, I was interested in the fact that I read a lot about people having check engine lights after doing downpipe installs, which I wasn't interested in. And so because they had the 400 cell count GESI cats, they guaranteed no check engine light. But at the point that I was like, well, I'm gonna tune the car anyway, so even if I do get a check engine light, I'll just tune it out with boot mode or something, kind of made that a moot point. So at that point, it was like, again, really pricey for downpipes, and I just, of all the things, I just didn't consider downpipes an area that I wanted to throw a bunch of money at. So I kind of ruled that out. Next was Evolution Raceworks, and that's just because I have their charge pipes and downpipe. Again, great build and quality and fitment and everything like that. Still kind of pricey in the realm of downpipes. Haven't really seen a whole lot of them in the wild. Not that there aren't many, it's just I really haven't run across, so not a whole lot of opinions and everything's out there on them. So I did consider them, but briefly. Next up, AR Design. So I was almost sold on AR Design from everything that I've read in terms of build quality and fitment. I mean, they're some of the best. But the problem with AR Design, which, you know, and again, price level, they were kind of up there at about 1,700 bucks. One of the issues that I ran into though was that, so I tend to buy a lot of my performance stuff from Extreme Powerhouse. It's fantastic customer service. And they stopped carrying at some point AR Design. I'm not 100% sure of the official reason, but from what I read somewhere was that they were having an issue with customer response time. So I don't know if that means that like, if a customer had an issue with an AR Design part to go to Extreme Powerhouse, that they were then having a problem getting a quick response from AR Design themselves. I don't know what the chain of, you know, command there is, but it does, I wouldn't say red flag, that's a little bit of a little bit of an extreme term for this, but I would still say that it did throw a little bit of an alarm, like, well, if it is the case that Extreme Powerhouse is having a hard time getting a hold of them for some issues, like what chance would I have? So again, I'm not really sure that that's the problem, but it was something that kind of was a factor in the decision making. Okay, so finally, ARM. Now, again, they weren't at the bottom of the list. I'm just talking about them last because they're the ones that I actually ended up going with. So ARM, which was a strong contender from early on, if you go on Beamer Post and look at around 2020 or so, like late 2020, when people were starting to install their downpipes, there is a flurry of threads about people having fitment issues, right? And I would say that probably for every one person though that said that they had an issue, and some of those issues could have been as extreme as having to have their shop tack weld the downpipes to the back of the downpipe flange, which is no good. But for everybody that seemed to have an issue, there were plenty of people that said, I got them installed and they were fine, sounds great, looks great, everything fit, really well. So it seemed to be, I don't know if it was a quality control problem or what, but to ARM's credit, two things. One, they clearly heard the community feedback of the problems they were having with their downpipes and revised the design with the flex joint section, which is version 2, which is the ones that I have, which, by the way, after they did that, I really didn't see much of anybody having fitment issues post the design revision. The other thing is that for everybody that seemed to have a problem, it seemed that ARM went out of their way to, I don't know, issue refunds or send them new parts or whatever it was, just to, to fix the issues. So that goes a long way in terms of dealing with a company and their willingness to, fix whatever the issue was. And again, the fact that they took that initial feedback into consideration and revised their design, I thought was a positive, right? Sucks that you have a problem to begin with, but if you're going to modify your car, I guess that's the risk you're going to take anyway. So credit to ARM for all of that stuff. So of course, once they had revised their design, which was, I don't know, at least 2 years ago now or so, that seemed like, all right, well, that coupled with the price of them seemed like a good choice to go with. Now, it's funny that even with the revised design that I seem to have hit a fitment snag. By the way, since I last recorded that segment, I think it was yesterday, I already have the new downpipe here, and they included a lollipop, which is nice. But do I have it? Did I actually carry it with me? Yes, I did. Sweet. Literally. It's terrible. Anyway, so I already have the new pipe here. Gonna get it in place tonight or tomorrow. But yeah, so that was kind of the debate on the different downpipes that I considered and why I chose ARM. I just thought they had a good reputation in terms of at least customer service. Again, sucks you had that part problem, but they took that feedback into consideration and then fixed the issue for the people that were having problems. I have to give them credit for the response time with me. They responded to my email within, I think it was like a couple of hours. And from initial email to getting the part here was less than 3 days. It was about 2.5 days. So not bad, right? Not bad. Now, catted versus catless, quick debate on that. For me, it was no brainer to go with catted downpipes. So I have the Valvetronic Equal Length Sport Exhaust, and if you use like Active AutoWorks website as a guide, for their equal length mid pipes, they say clearly on their website, if you have catless downpipes, they highly recommend the non-resonated mid pipes because equal length mid pipes work to get rid of the rasp that is inherent to the S55 design, but catless downpipes introduced in that scenario will just bring that rasp right back. So given that the mid pipes that I have, I believe they're non-resonated, definitely catless, it made sense to go with catted because again, I didn't want to introduce any of the rasp. The other thing was the smell. So commonly with catless downpipes, even if you get them installed properly with a good fitment and everything like that, they introduce, a bit of a fuel smell into the cabin. Not really looking for that. I don't mind it terribly, to be honest, but still really wasn't looking for that for my daily, and not to mention my wife, she's hypersensitive to smells like that, so I'm not looking to make that environment bad. I drive everywhere anyway, and we're always taking long road trips, so why mess that up, right? But yeah, I mainly just didn't want to run the risk of reintroducing any kind of rasp. I love the way the car sounds now. I just wanted to give it maybe a little bit more volume and extra power. So far that seems the case. Again, I said I will make a follow-up video in a week or two after I've had, little time, sun's getting in my eyes, after I've had the time with the car for a little bit. I will say that in the bit that I've been driving it for the past few days, zero detection of a change in smell in the cabin. So catted downpipes for the win. So anyway, guys, all right, well, that was, I think, long. I don't know how long this video is going to end up being, but it's a lot of footage that I'm still kind of going through. So in any case, I hope you enjoyed this video, got something out of it. So give it a like if you did, subscribe if you haven't already. I will make that follow-up video for the downpipe and exhaust full review in a week or two. And in the meantime, I will catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching.